Hello, Club Pod listeners. It's Nicole back with another episode of Builder's Journey. For today's episode, I spoke with Cherie, who, founder of Water and Music, a membership funded newsletter, research hub, and community forum focused on the intersection between music and tech. In the podcast, we discussed Cherie's process building the foundation of Water and Music before making the transition into a DAO, the tools used in her community to create deep, authentic connections between members, and how the codes of conduct have emerged and adapted as the community has grown. Welcome. Good morning. How are you, Cherie?
Good morning. Doing well. Yeah, as we're speaking, this is a big week in, I guess, crypto Web3 land because ETH Denver is happening right now. So yeah, very excited about that heading there tomorrow. But for the time being, also just very excited to be here with you and
Nice.
yeah, chat all things Web3 and I guess my own journey here too.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn with and from you. So, before we get started, would you be willing to introduce yourself and tell us about your project, Water and Music?
Yes, so I am the founder and publisher, self-described chief DAO boy on the internet of Water Music. Um, I guess historically, Water Music since 2019 has been a paid newsletter that mostly I've been running myself, focused on analyzing music and tech trends. And music and tech has been my beat as a writer for the last 5 to 6 years. But over the last 6 months, we've been very rapidly shifting um, our model around like editorial and research into more collaborative and collective models around research and music and tech, namely becoming a DAO and kind of long term having the wider like water music community also both contribute to and then take part financially in the growth of the brand as a whole. So now I would say Water Music is a newsletter and budding research DAO, and we're working on a bunch of collaborative research and editorial projects in the realm of music and tech as well.
Amazing. And I am a proud member. I joined, I think, a little bit before the pandemic hit. And this actually relates to a question that I have around your Discord specifically. So, I think that, I guess I'll zoom out first and say that I think that your community is a really interesting one to look at when you're looking at DAOs because you existed pre Web3. Clearly, you've been interested in blockchain for a while, but you were building community and I think doing a lot of the sort of Web3 mindset builds within your community without perhaps, obviously thinking about a token and a DAO. And then, I was listening to your conversation with Matt and Holly, and you used the, a little bit and then all at once. And so all of a sudden, I think like it made sense. But I think it's really interesting to sort of peel back the layers of how you'd been building for some time, because I think it also helps people understand how DAO building is not this thing where, you can necessarily spin it up in a day and it's just going to all of a sudden function. And so one of the things I want to explore a little bit is a lot of the sort of foundational building that you'd been doing over the many, many years. And so I guess for starters, can you talk a little bit about when you first set up the Discord? What was the thinking there? Obviously you had your newsletter, you'd been writing in a ton of, music publications for some time. So you had a presence out in the world, and you had your Patreon subscription. But when you moved over to Discord, why did you decide to do that? And what were those first, months and years of, within Discord building and connecting with your community? What was that like?
Yeah, so I think the reason why, and I guess, yeah, for context for um, people listening slash watching who might not know about the history of water music. So yeah, so now we live on our own website. Our Discord server is still active, but I launched in 2019 just as a Patreon page, and um, I guess from the very beginning, and the reason for launching a paid membership was in part based on my experience going to a lot of like industry conferences as part of my job as a freelance writer, meeting a lot of really cool, like-minded people in like the music startup world or people who are working on the edge of like music streaming, kind of emerging music tech, especially like VR, AR, crypto, also thinking like 5, 6 years back. Um, and I would always be so surprised that a lot of those people had like never met each other. So like
Mm,
a dream scenario was like, oh, like there should be some kind of space, whether, in person, IRL, or like online, ideally running online where these people could meet and have these, really cutting edge, like forward thinking, thought provoking discussions and like kind of have that, keep that discussion going, um, just about where music and tech was headed. And yeah, especially at these conferences, I could tell that like the kind of like side discussions were um, I guess these side discussions where like-minded people working similar fields could meet with and exchange knowledge with each other were like equally, if not like oftentimes even more interesting than the kind of like official programming. So I was trying to think of like how that translates to media. I noticed like a lot of the way that like media treats their like readership is just as an audience to like deliver content to without thinking about like potential connections that could be made um, between or like among readers as like kind of a community in its own right, and that potentially being a source of value. So yeah, I was already thinking about that horizontal interaction among like readers or people in the music and tech worlds as like a core source of value for the Water Music membership, like kind of on equal footing with whatever exclusive articles or databases or other like materials that I would publish. And Discord, I guess, yeah, like part of it was definitely just like I guess a practicality logistically because there is an integration between Patreon and Discord that's like relatively lower lift to set up, so that was just available. But then as um, I guess as the months progressed, after the membership launched, I realized like Discord, I'm kind of glad that it lived on Discord and not somewhere like Slack, which feels, I guess, like people have an association with um, work, I guess, too much. Like they don't,
yeah.
whereas like Discord, it kind of is like a separate space. Obviously, Web3 might be different now because like everything's on Discord, but but like at the time, it like felt like a more like casual, open space. People just like felt more comfortable having more like open but still like thoughtful discussions about music and tech.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I'm glad that it's like, yeah, I'm glad the server has stayed, the kind of culture around it has stayed ever since.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So I love that. And I didn't understand or sort of, I wasn't aware of that history, that that's how you'd been thinking about it for some time, but it definitely translates into the community and you feel those many to many connections so much. And it's so clear just the relationships that are there. Let's explore that a little bit more because I think that you've experimented with building the relationships and fostering those connections quite a bit. And so within the Discord, you have, with fair consistency, some regular Discord meetings, but then you've facilitated other social gatherings and mixers. Again, so much of this was happening in, 2020 and 2021 when people were obviously really thirsty for that. But generally, it seems like it's something that you've been thinking about for some time. So, can you share some specific examples of some of the consistent touch points and meeting points, but then beyond that, some of those mixers and ways for people to connect with each other?
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely multiple layers to it, and the structure of that has certainly changed with this like DAO transition in the last 6 months. But I guess going all the way back to like, yeah, 2019, early 2020, um, the membership, so I guess the community element has always been there since the very beginning as like a source of value in the membership. But the I guess like the editorial and research side was different in that when I first launched the membership, the framing um, of the value from editorial standpoint was just like getting exclusive access or like deeper access to like just my own thoughts as an individual about like where music and tech was going because it was um yeah for the most part like a solo creator like we will call today like kind of endeavor. Um but in like the first year I would host um these weekly hangouts that just had the purpose of diving deeper into like the music and tech news of the week. And they were super casual. They weren't like official panel discussions or anything. And I think early on, usually it was like only around 10 people, like 10, 15, 20 people at like the very, very most who like would attend these weekly hangouts. But like that, even just having that opportunity for people to um, not just meet each other, but express themselves and their own thoughts by speaking out loud, I realized was like very important. And I can definitely see that now in the server where like there's some people whose um, like comfort zone is like just chatting in like text form in a Discord server, and that's like their like preferred mode of expression, just like text chat. Whereas like there are certainly other people who are like very overwhelmed by that like experience, but really like the idea of just like gathering at the same time, just like talk out loud through things. So I think from the beginning, having those, I guess, multiple kinds of opportunities for people to meet and chat with each other and express themselves was very important. So yeah, we had those like weekly hangouts. We I also experimented a bit with um, and there are a lot of apps for this now, but we used a tool that's now called Gather Round, which is like which facilitates like randomized um, matching within communities for like one-on-one video interactions. So like I think the biggest and this was later on in Water Music's membership, but we used Gather Round to host these mixers of like 50 people, and the idea is that you'd be matched with like 4 to 5 people over the course of an hour, just having these like very like speed kind of discussions. Um, just like get to know each other better and talk more about music and tech or life or just anything that you're interested in for the day. Um, and doing those, I actually haven't done those in a while, but maybe now it's time, especially as the community has like grown a lot in the last 6 months to like revisit those. But what I liked about those too, and I think what a lot of people especially crave during the pandemic, um, was a sense of spontaneity that you would more easily get in with like in-person interactions or like to go back to this conference example, like running into somebody who you hadn't seen in a while. Like, oh, it's so cool to see you, and then you kind of like go off into like unexpected side chats. Like, it's hard. It can be difficult, especially with an interface like Discord, to facilitate that. So, yeah, any initiatives that I took early on to like facilitate that spontaneity went a long way. And then now, as the community has grown, there's a more official layer of like weekly town halls, which are like uh, I think very important. Those are more um, I don't want to yeah, they are I guess more top down in structure in that it's just like the Water Music core team giving updates on like the state of the DAO and the state of our research. But it is an opportunity for the community to like come together and like always have that feedback loop between like I guess what we're doing and what the community needs. The town halls have been really good for that. So yeah, so I'd say those are the kind of main layers of interaction. Yeah.
Yeah, the random gatherings were very fun. Definitely something that I was craving at the time, and they did go a long way as far as making you feel like you had more friends in the community as well. And I don't know what
Yeah.
size just the Discord was back then in 2020. You've now grown to be quite large. And so I'm curious about what onboarding and helping people find themselves and find each other and sort of feel oriented and connected within this increasingly large community. What does that look like, and what are some intentionalities that you're bringing to the onboarding process now?
Um, yeah, I literally just had a like an onboarding related discussion yesterday. So like this is all like being shaped in real time. I guess
It
it's like a
always
disclaimer.
is.
I think as always is,
Yeah.
especially with just DAOs and Web3. I can say though that and I wonder to what extent this is unique or this is distinct to water and music's community and also business model because we are like a paid membership and the DAO in terms of how you can contribute is a subset of that. There's there are definitely two different kinds of onboarding experiences that we're working on now. Um, Historically, I guess I've thought of onboarding just from like a member perspective in terms of answering the question of how can you get the most out of your membership and like a lot of why people paid for the membership is getting access to or like being able to engage with this community, getting access to certain like information. Certainly, like the editorial and like data and research side of water music is a big source of value too. So like there, like the member onboarding experience is just yeah, like what are you looking for? What kind of value are you hoping to get? And then we can point you in the right direction. Um, Whereas DAO onboarding is more about how can I, it's not how can I make the most out of my membership, but how can I start to contribute?
Mm.
And that's like a much more, I guess, from the, it is, so ideally it's not a hard binary, but in terms of like the different areas we would point people to, the overall member experience is like um, getting a sense of like the overall lay of the land and then um, like how can I get access to the information that I need now? Whereas like the DAO contributor side is much more like active in the sense of matching members like skill sets or interests with active DAO projects that are happening. And so then so now in the shape of water music now in terms of like projects people can contribute to, the main one is definitely the collaborative research arm where we have a bunch of like projects that we're working on. The current season is about music and Web3, so we would like point people depending on their skills to like if we need more interviewers or more data analysts, we would like point people there. Or and then we also have like a budding education slash academy arm or events arms. So if people are interested in those and getting involved in that way, there's we would point people in that direction. Um, and I guess to bring it back, like so that's kind of the mentally like the framework that I have. Like member onboarding is one thing, contributor onboarding is a whole other thing, and for a lot of members, it doesn't necessarily make sense to um, put them like straight into the contributor bucket because maybe that's not what they're interested in. Maybe they're interested in generally like supporting water music and um, just like yes, supporting and engaging with the community as best they can without diving straight to being a contributor. Um, what we are, and in terms of what we're doing for onboarding, Kat is our amazing community ops lead slash community manager, and she um, hosts member onboarding calls every Monday at the same time. So having a sense of like regularity around that, and now there's an interesting I guess behavior of like not just new members joining, but also some like old members joining too, who like maybe are like trying to just understand how the community has like evolved in the last 6 months, or maybe they are ready to get um, to step in more as contributors after like supporting for like a year or so. So it is a good mix of people who tune into those calls. We have, and something that we're trying to improve on right now is how to scale the discussions that are happening during those live onboarding calls in like an async way, such that you don't like have to like even if you're not able to attend those calls, you still have access to all the information that you need. So we do have a member handbook similar to Seed Club actually, or similar to many other DAOs, just like a handbook that like gives a lay of the land of um, ways you can contribute, like a Discord guide. You know, if you're new to Discord, um, and what we're looking into now, which I know a lot of other like media brands or also communities will do, is just like a drip, something like a drip email campaign where like once you sign up, um, over the next couple of days, we'll be like, hey, like thanks so much for joining our community. Over the next few days, we'll give you like a brief tour of the water music world and what it looks like. So yeah, that's I guess what we're implementing right now is just trying to scale those um, like async resources beyond just discussions that might be happening in the Discord server, like through these live calls.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. How you've divided out, sort of participant members and then contributors and tailoring the onboarding experience for both. But I also want to just call out, you know, it seems like this is a little bit intuitive, but just the sort of accessibility of how you're thinking about these as well, where you have, audio, you have text, you have, I think it's really meaningful how you're selecting for like different social preferences and different ways of consuming information, which I think is, really lovely and powerful. Yeah. I think that, yeah, one of the things I'd like to, I guess, shift into a little bit is around contributors. So you mentioned the collaborative research work that, recently happened. Before we get into that, I'd love to sort of just talk briefly about your work when you were an individual. And the reason I think this is helpful is because I think a lot of times DAOs obviously spring out of an idea that one or a few people have, and then people coalesce around that. And so I think for people who haven't necessarily read your work or who aren't necessarily focused on music and tech, can you, where I see is like there's this immense curiosity, but then, and like immense love for music, but also a real appreciation, respect for like data and information. And so I guess, would you be willing to maybe just give a little bit of context of the nature of your writing and research work, sort of pre community collaborative work, like before the sort of collaborative research started?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think initially, and maybe yeah, it might be helpful to go back to even like I guess how I got started writing about music and tech, because like that
Mm,
intersection is like was very random and like very niche or seemingly like yeah like niched me at the time. So I was interested in I've been yeah I've like played music my whole life, so that strand like the creative side has been definitely a through line throughout my whole life. Studied math and stats in college, so I was thinking about that intersection of like music and data, music and tech from a very early stage. And so I thought I was going to work in like a more industry facing role, like a data analytics role at like a music streaming or music
mm-hmm,
tech company or a label, etc. So randomly in college, I like accompanied my friend to this media career fair, and I randomly met this editor at Forbes who just happened to be looking for more people to cover streaming for their entertainment section. Um, and this was in like 2015. As with all these things, like timing plays a very important role. I think 2015 was the year that like Apple Music launched that summer. So like the whole big tech discussion around streaming was like shifting very rapidly. Tons of acquisitions are being made on like the streaming side, and so yeah, Forbes was looking for more people to cover that world for them. I guess through their I guess as a contributor. I was a junior in college at the time. Seemed like a really good fit. And I was in the mindset of like, I know I'm interested in this. I have no idea um, how exactly I'm gonna like express it or implement it, but I'll like try this out, and like see how it goes. And immediately, and I guess my writing style is very not just analytical, but I guess in being analytical, always trying to put things in context. And what I found very quickly in like writing about music and tech was that there wasn't as much writing from like that perspective. So there are a lot of like very quick um, news hits. Like for example, I think sometime between 2016 and 2018, there was a stat that YouTube paid out $1 billion to rights holders or something like that. And so there was like a lot of hype around like that like figure, which is like a nice round figure. like great, I guess, PR for the company, a great like thing to latch onto as like a headline. But as with like, yeah, most of streaming economics, like if you really dive into like the nuance of that and like kind of follow the money of like where that money's going to, who isn't getting that money, like how many views or how many streams you have to like get on YouTube to even like start to make a living. And you can like extend that discussion to, of course, Spotify and like other bigger streaming services. It becomes a lot more complex in terms of understanding that like economic picture around how money flows in music. And so I was, yeah, I was like hard pressed to find um, at least, so there are a lot of good like academic papers that were written about this, but not that much that was happening from a more critical lens in like industry or like trade media, at least
Yeah.
as I was seeing at the time. And so I thought I definitely saw an opportunity to like hopefully shape that discussion even a small way. And so yeah, I definitely see that as my role of like putting things more in context. I'm a big, I guess, proponent of like systems thinking in general. So like always zooming out, looking at like a bird's eye view of what's happening, rather than just having a like myopic view on this like very specific area of the industry. I've always been driven by interdisciplinary thinking. So like what can the music industry learn from the media industry? I think there's like still so much that's like relatively unexplored there in terms of like parallel challenges with industries face. Um, Music and gaming, music and fashion. I think there's like a lot of like cross pollination opportunities there. Music and Web3, of course. And yeah, so I think and how I describe my work and like what I'm trying to instill in water music now, even as it's like, or I guess especially as it has become more collaborative, is just connecting the dots and trying to synthesize um, all of like the noise of news that's happening in like music and tech into some kind of coherent picture or path for like where things could potentially go.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
let's talk about that because I think that, yeah, what you paint is a very complex picture and takes a ton of work. I mean, yeah, having consumed and read your work, I think it definitely always stood out as like, this is actual analysis of the data. It's not, headlines. It's not just sort of one offhand stat. It's not the picture of the music industry that I want it to be, or painting good guys and bad guys. And so, with bringing that journalistic rigor into a community, I'm really curious. How you brought that sort of individual thinking of what Water and Music was founded on into the collaborative research. We're going to talk about the cooperation piece of it, but I'm really curious about the sort of like ethos and standards and how you brought that individual vision into something that was going to be held by the community. How did you communicate? How did you orient people to get there?
Yeah. Again, as the community is scaling, it's like definitely one of the biggest challenges I think we face now in terms of like decentralizing. I think the main issue is like decentralizing voice and decentralizing style. I think even the most centralized media brands have issues with this a lot of the times. Like the New York Times, like one of the you know biggest, probably the biggest, like yeah, one of the biggest metro papers in the world. They've like run into issues all the time, and they have like one of the most rigorous style guides. They run into issues with this all the time, from like a stylistic and like ethical standpoint. Yeah, unfortunately, just in the last couple of years. So I think yeah, like try and do this in a DAO. I think like exacerbates that issue. How I have um, been able to, I think, instill at least a consistent voice in like the community as well. So I guess I'll start with the my approach to like instilling a culture consistently within the community, because I think that does extend to like the collaborative research side too, which is more newer and more emergent, relatively speaking. A lot of it is just like very assertively leading by example. I actually, uh, I realized the extent to which I was doing this recently because Alex, who's our like tech lead on the modern music team, has been running a bunch of uh, analysis on just like Discord engagement as part of our transition into being a DAO and like our first token airdrop, which I'm happy to dive into, yeah, later. And as part of that, he found that uh, by far I sent the most messages in the Discord server by like a long, long shot in the first like year and a half, which it does make sense because it was a very like individual centric business and that I was the main person running the thing. And so I genuinely did want to and like really enjoyed engaging with everyone in the server. But I realized a lot of that was also like leading by example in terms of actively like demonstrating the kinds of discussions that I wanted to have happen in the server, um, and like being a very active guide in that sense. And it did take a very, very long time, I think, before people felt comfortable and confident, like leading those discussions without necessarily having to have um, like someone leading by example. That said, I mean, this is something that um, on like the core water music team now, we still embrace like uh, very actively, like always leading by example in terms of like the kinds of discussions that we want to have, like always being active in kind of the community and in the server as much as we can, and not like being detached in that way. Um, so that's one thing that comes to mind in terms of like, uh, you know, I guess like leading by example, showing not telling in like a community context is very important. Um, with I guess collaborative on the collaborative research side, because the model is still emergent, I think a lot of it is still leading by example. So I still try to attend as many. Um, I guess very important additional part of like community engagement and now a value of like the water music membership is um, having basically full access to these weekly research calls that we do as part of our research projects. Um, the primary purpose of those calls is just to coordinate next steps for each thread, but they are open to the community and there are like many like active lurkers as like they often describe themselves or we also describe them
Hello.
just like want to listen in, which is oh yes. Yes, thank you. Yes, and those people are yeah, we like welcome as many lurkers, you know, in like the threads and in calls. Because I think, and then there's definitely been a path where people will spend like several weeks lurking just to try to like understand the context of like how the research is happening, and then after several weeks, they'll like jump in and start contributing. So yeah, they play a very important role. But so yeah, I try to tune into these calls as much as I can and like ask the kinds of follow-up questions that I would want people to ask in a research context, even just something as simple as like um as simple as just asking like why or like so what. I think so
Yeah.
what is a very common like editorial research question that I'd like try to ask in my writing in general and definitely in the articles that we write in terms of like always making sure that um there is going to be like whatever we write has value to the community and to the industry at large. So just like having an active presence and leading by example there. And then um, I'm in the process. It's a very like interesting and kind of strange process of trying to create like a style guide that can be scaled to this community based on what I like was previously just thinking of in my head. Um, and like yeah, so that's so for example, I have like a detailed list of like what kinds of context might be interesting to dive into around a given piece of news and like trying to distill my otherwise like pretty unstructured process of just like doing a bunch of Google searches or like going down internet rabbit holes into like a series of like I guess very specific questions that people can ask about a given piece of news like um, for example if a startup recently raised funding, um, you can dig into a water music database and see like, oh, is that funding category, has there been a lot of buzz around it, or is it kind of dying down? And if it's like dying down, oh, maybe that's an interesting like thread to explore. Like, why isn't there as much interest in this area anymore? So, um, yeah, so I think a lot of it for now is just like actively, but also patiently, like leading by example and like still being active as a contributor while also working to create uh, what is essentially like a style guide or just like clear documentation that you can like give to people as a guide so they can do the research on their own. So yeah, I would say still work in progress there.
Yeah. It sounds like one of my favorite authors and one of my favorite books, Pattern Language. We've been seeing Christopher Alexander's work pop up in some really fun and interesting ways within Web3. But I feel like what you're describing actually of sort of codifying behaviors that you first have to become aware of yourself and then, putting them in. It's a really unique way of thinking about this style guide because it is, I think, a standalone, within sort of music tech media. So, yeah, I look forward to seeing that further develop. So, yeah, speaking of popular Web3 texts and movements, I feel like another one is Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy, where we're seeing this, just happen again and again and pop up again and again within Web3 to use the way that my friend describes emergent strategy is, which I think is really a great way of capturing it, is sort of the birds, coming together in this flock that is, coordinated and no individual one knows where they're going, but as a group, it becomes, and, they move as a group. And I was mostly a lurker, dipped in a little bit here and there, but within that research process, it definitely, looking from the outside, that's how it felt like, looking at like this group of people coming together and all of a sudden they took shape in this really amazing way where, they were clearly going in a direction. So I would love to sort of tease out a few of those threads because you did this big project, music and Web3, but within that there was specific topics. And so I'd be really curious of what those decision-making experiences were and like the emergence of interest and organization, how people got assigned themselves to specific topics. How did those topics emerge? Who went into them? And then how did those final products ultimately get edited and published?
Yeah, I think that process was, yeah, completely like emergent and chaotic in the best way. I think having what helped with a sense of direction, just like, yeah, thinking out loud as you were saying that was um, just like a deadline. Like we don't know what the final form of this will take,
I love
but
it.
we know that we're trying to get this published by this time. I think that
Mm,
definitely helps. Like um, eventually like collectively go towards some kind of like shared sense of direction and kind of like what the end goal was. So yeah, I guess starting from the beginning of that process, so the whole process of putting together this big report on music and Web3 took 8 weeks, and the first week was just open like ideation and feedback from the community. So we had a dedicated thread in our server where we just asked for people's like most pressing questions and concerns about music and Web3. Um, and so I guess the core team, like decided that that was going to be the topic, I guess in a more centralized top down way. But then from there, in terms of um, addressing specific needs of the community, that was completely bottom up in terms of the shape the report ultimately took, which I'm glad that happened because one of the I guess my previous writing about music and Web3 was a lot about the like business side. So like how much money was generated from like music NFT sales, for example, and like doing much more detailed like financial analysis around that. Um, in contrast, like by far one of the biggest um, topics of concern in the community was about like fan onboarding into Web3 and like what that experience was like. Um, and that ended up being like one of the most intense like research threads in terms of like the different sources of data that were incorporated. Like we had a whole fan survey, tons of different like interviews, press release annotations, but like that's not necessarily a topic that I would have prioritized just as like an individual mind. So I'm really, really glad that, yeah, we had that kind of bottom up ideation process. And then from there, yeah, we synthesized everyone's concerns into these like 5 threads that ended up being kind of like the 5 chapter format of the report. Um, and from there, I mean, so a general um, trend that I've seen, not just in research, but with like other parts of the DAO now, like with the educational side and the event side, is that um, the calls, yeah, so like the only thing that was certain was the deadline and um, the need to have just like weekly check-in calls just to like make sure that um, that we were like all still in touch and like all on the same page. Everything else was like completely emergent. Like we people would not really know like how the calls would go or like what direction or like what rabbit holes like we would go down. So as an example, I helped lead the music Web3 like tooling part of the report where um, we like built this big market map of all the music Web3 tools that were out there, especially the ones that artists could use, and then did some like analysis of that market map. Um, and we had weekly research calls um, that would, I guess, that would just like outline next steps. But we also would go down like totally unexpected rabbit holes about like the state of music Web3 tech that like everyone was genuinely interested in, and that did like help drive our like perspective on the topic in like unexpected ways. We also intentionally every week, why it was so emergent was that we intentionally wanted to increase, at least have the opportunity to increase the contributor pool each week. And so rather than just like locking in at the beginning, like, oh, like here, so at, like towards the beginning, we would try to solidify who like the project lead was, because I think that is important. Like, knowing who the point person is to ask like questions about a specific part of the research process. But aside from that, like if people wanted to come in one week and like contribute in some way, we wanted to like kind of welcome that with open arms and like invite them to these calls. Um, and so I think that, yeah, it's definitely added to the emergent aspect of like, every week some new perspective could come in that we would not have known about before. And that would definitely like help or hopefully, yeah, ideally like sharpen our arguments kind of in our research. So yeah, so I'd say like people's uh, roles and like ways they could contribute kind of evolved as a result of that. And then what was especially impressive to me as someone who has like, yeah, historically just like written and edited all of like my own articles and like underwater music was like in the last 2 weeks, um, there were like a handful of people who had been like lurking for the entire process previously, but then like the last 2 weeks came and we were like, oh, we have like these really long articles that need a lot of like editing work. And basically these like pop-up editing teams just like formed very spontaneously, which is like so crazy. And like there are a lot of lurkers who are like, oh, like that's my skill set. Like I know how I can contribute now. And they just like immediately went in and like started marking up these Google Docs, which was like very, very cool for me to see. And also like that process has definitely informed like trying to build this like water music DAO style guide, because like in that process a lot of people had questions about like, oh, like what is our voice, like what is the kind of tone that we want to like put forth into the world as a DAO. So yeah, I would like those roles in terms of who stepped in were like completely like undetermined and like very yeah, get very spontaneous, which was very, very cool to see. Um, Now with our current projects, I guess we are expecting a similar process to happen. But now we can like have a bit more structure around it as opposed to it being like totally unpredictable. Like we know we're gonna need at least 2 weeks at the end for like synthesis and editing. And so like we're already like we're planning on putting out calls earlier on to people who are interested in getting involved just for like organization's sake. Um, but yeah, so I would say in short, it was like very yeah, all very emergent just based on like immediate needs at the time and just like making that clear, communicating that as clearly and as frequently as like possible and also as reasonable in the server so that people, when like could come in week after week, um, just as they liked or as
Yeah.
time allowed for them. Yeah.
I mean, I guess sort of looking at one of the patterns I'm seeing in all of the pieces that you discussed has been this sort of like the modeling and then the community following that, and then the modeling again and the community following that. And it is this interesting push pull that I think that DAOs are very much experiencing is, how do you model, how do you form, then how are you informed by your community, and then how do you continue modeling. There's so many things that I mean, I could talk about this all forever, but I think that one topic that, is super important always has definitely, I think, shown itself to be necessary. And I think, particularly relevant right now in Web3 is around codes of conduct within community. And so you talked a little bit about the modeling that you did early on with how you engage, with various members. And, I mentioned I'm a member of your community. And so I was, I think, loosely aware of the codes of conduct that you had for your Discord and for your community. But there were just, this was, what is time anymore in the pandemic, but sometime in the last year, little things, small things would happen, whether it was like some shilly behavior or lack of transparency or perceived lack of transparency of somebody's, business affiliation. And I'd love for you to just maybe briefly talk about how your code of conduct has been iterative, both in what it actually says, but then in how you model and implement it.
For sure. Yeah. So I think early on, the code of conduct was like a set of loose, I don't want to say like loose, but like more like open-ended guidelines that yeah, I also did feel like I had to like actively demonstrate in the community, but like uh for example, even just like or basic but very important things that are also in like Discord's own community guidelines, like be nice and respectful, no hate speech, no, discrimination, um, etc. But then also being, I guess like, so my goal with the server is to create like an ongoing space where people feel comfortable and safe having, especially like thoughtful debates and like being able to engage with constructive critique of what's happening because there is so much um, to critique, for better or for worse in the music and tech world, especially with streaming and Web3, especially. Um, and yeah, with Web3 in particular, it's been really interesting to see how I guess how do I say it's like a lot of Discord servers are do have just like a purely almost like a purely like shilly or promotional purpose. I guess like no
Mm-hmm.
offense to those like projects, but like I think there is definitely
Yeah, different
um
communities,
that like
different, yeah.
overly, yeah, different community, different just like modes of like interacting. I mean, you see this all the time on like Twitter as well. And some of that I have been wary, like especially in the last 6 months as um, Water Music's like DAO and Web3 ambitions have become more open and public. There's definitely been a much more Web3 native um, audience or like, yeah, like membership that has come in, which is which is really cool in that it's like kind of the opposite perspective of like Web3 native people who want to learn more about the music industry and like how that works from business side versus the other way around. And like, yeah, I really, really like that Water Music is like the place for those different kinds of communities to like meet and interact and debate certain issues in music and tech now. Um, that said, uh, yeah, I think there was like there was just one instance where it was in the last year where there was like a founder of a Web3 company that uh, I guess misconstrue. Okay, so I guess I wanted to have the server be a space for thoughtful critique, but I didn't actually have that as like a clear like point in the code of conduct. I guess it was just mostly just like leading by example and like that. I guess assuming that people um, like understood that to be like kind of a shared, truth in the community or just like a shared guideline. Um, but then as like where Web3 people came in, there's definitely like more I guess like more just like self promotion of like projects and or like misconstruing we had like a be nice like clause and be nice and like respectful, which is definitely still like important and that's still there, but that doesn't mean that people can't like critique or give feedback on your product, especially if like you're not being like transparent about certain things and like there's a certain expected standard around transparency, especially in Web3. Like people have the right, as long as they're respectful to like ask about that. So yeah, there's some instances, mostly Web3/crypto related, that like I guess required us to like update that code of conduct with just like being very clear that the space is open to critique, and that like we want to kind of definitely want to foster that culture as opposed to like blindly promoting or supporting, some trend in the industry. Um, there were also some instances, and like I, it's been few enough instances that we haven't had to like do a kind of a drastic redesign of the server, but I do think about the challenge of like balancing disclosing financial affiliations with the sense of like anonymity that I think a lot of people enjoy getting out of Discord and Web3 in general. So like I know I'm part of a few other more like professional community oriented Discord servers where people are required to like disclose the company they work for or like their Twitter handle like in their Discord handle like in the community and having that like um and having that standard of like being clear about like your identity. We don't have that in the Water Music server. Like if you want to stay anonymous, it's like totally fine. But there have been, yeah, a couple of instances, again, almost all like Web3 related, where people are like saying like, oh, this project is really cool. Like, wonder if people have checked it out. But then like you dig deeper and they're like the founder or like they're either invested in the company or like they're the founder of
Yeah.
the company. And it's like, you should always like disclose that. And like not just to like uh I guess protect the community, but also like if you disclose that you're affiliated, maybe that opens up an opportunity for like people who are interested in learning more about the project to like reach out to you, maybe like collaborate. And so I think it just helps foster a healthier community in general. So like yeah, we've had to add some clauses, additional clauses as a result of those instances. And then now is the next step, which is I think very important, especially for DAOs, with thinking about like a lot of situations that have happened with like the ENS DAO, for example, in the last few weeks, is like not just having guidelines, but very clear um, consequences for if people violate those guidelines. And so for now, fortunately, within the water music community, yeah, people have been mostly like very supportive and like respectful. And so any kind of um, like acting in terms of yeah acting like consequences for someone violating guidelines has just been like a case by case thing. So like Cat will kind of like run it by the team, we'll discuss internally, and then we might like delete a message or like just reach out to the person to like reframe their message or something. But then as the DAO like scales and also as people rightfully so have an expectation that they can like help shape, or if they like want to like offboard a member or like offboard a team, even like a core team member, if it does have to come to that, like having clear like procedures for that is like definitely something we're actively thinking about right now, and that's kind of like the next step in iterating on the code of conduct. Yeah.
Yes, that is a moment that I think many Web3 communities are in right now. But, I think going back, the
Yeah.
little tweaks that you've done in the iterative way that you've gone about it, I think will ultimately make things, smoother and stronger. All right. Well, I know that you need to get ready for ETH Denver. I will be feeling much FOMO. I know you're going to have a great time. I'm so appreciative of this time talking about your building journey. And before we sign off, where can we find you and Water and Music?
Yes. So I am personally most active on Twitter, as is much of Web3 land. My handle is at Cherie42, so numbers 42. And for Water Music, our Twitter handle is water underscore and underscore music. And you can go to our website also, waterandmusic.com, to browse our articles and learn more about our membership and our DAO as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. This is great.